Hey guys, in today's video I'll be sharing with you how to draw against a Grandmaster with the black pieces, as we see our protagonist I am Sigan do against Jure Borosek. One thing to keep in mind is that actually a draw against a Grandmaster with black is really not such a bad result. You know, they do have the advantage of the white pieces, and so they can play quite solidly and make it somewhat hard for us to win if they really want to. Sigan actually goes for a very interesting approach, playing the move Bishop G4, the Portuguese system. And while the Portuguese is one of these systems that, of course, objectively is not very sound, like if white plays F3 and continues very critically from here, he does get a big advantage out of the opening. But it's also something that black was surely quite comfortable with, and it's also a very tricky system for white, where he may not be willing to enter the crazy complications of G4 and C4 in a game against a much lower rated player. More likely he just wants to play something very safe and get a stable advantage, try to outplay his opponent. But that also plays a little bit more into black's hands with this system. By the way, if you do want to learn more about the Portuguese, I can definitely recommend that you check out my course, Play the Strongest Scandinavian. I put a link to it in the description below at a special price for you guys. So after Queen D5, Knight F3, E6. Basically, black is quite happy to have got his bishop outside the pawn chain before playing e6. And one difference you'll see, by the way, in these Portuguese variations with 2 knight f6 is that basically in the Scandinavian normally you're going for some setup like queen a5, c6, knight bd7 and play quite solidly. But in the Portuguese you can play a little bit more dynamically by putting your knight on c6 instead, like we see in the game. Also, if white did play a move like d5 in the center, what do you think would be the move for black to play here? Let me know in the comments, by the way, what you would play as black in this position, and I will share the answer at the end of the video to see whether you got it right. Well, white played the move h3, which, if you got the previous puzzle right, you'll sort of understand why h3 makes sense to avoid some queen takes h2 checkmates. That's a hint I'll give. Black is undeterred, he castles along and continues to play very dynamically, where with rook hg8, the kings are castled on opposite sides, and both sides are going to go for very aggressive play. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, okay, Max, isn't this how to draw against a Grandmaster, so shouldn't we be playing very solidly instead of, throwing the kitchen sink at the opponent's king? The thing is, though, that if you are a much lower-rated player and you just play something very solid, then you're probably just going to get outplayed by your opponent strategically. The best chance is going to come from saying him difficult questions and giving him some tough defensive decisions to make. Black goes bishop e7, and again I think white's desire to be cautious may have turned against him a little bit, because as white you've got to go b4 and try to get the attack going. You don't really care if knight takes b4, because white just gets a very nice open file for the rook anyway. After g5, b5. By the way, this position is one reason why you might have preferred to put the bishop on f8, just so that knight can go back to e7 and go to the d5 outpost. But as it stands, you can go g4. You do get to open up the g file and get very nice active play against the white king. I mean, black's attack does seem a little bit faster in a position like this, and also the very nice outpost for your knight gives a good insurance against anything going really wrong for you. In the game, white goes knight g5, and a little bit surprisingly, black decides not to trade, because, I mean, the endgames are just very nice for black in the Scandinavian, right? Because you have a space disadvantage, and every trade of pieces is just making your life so much easier. You've got a beautiful outpost for knight on d5, you can easily apply more pressure against the backward pawn on d4, and, I mean, you're just loving life here. But instead, black decides to go queen g6, and we have a somewhat curious repetition. Again, one thing to keep in mind is that if the Grandmaster is offering you a repetition, they're probably just messing with your head and they're not going to actually take it, but play something a little bit different to deviate. So here I would have even considered, maybe a move other than queen h5, but I think queen h5 is, to be fair, perfectly fine as well. Knight g5, black misses a second chance to favourably trade queens, and as I mentioned before, white does decide to keep the game going. But even with the queens on the board, this is still a very pleasant position for black. We got the pressure on d4 from the minor pieces. The idea of going for a g5, g4 is definitely not out of the question either. After rook d2, I'd say that black was even a little bit, let's say, I don't know if unlucky is the right word, but definitely it's a game where black is the one playing for the win at this stage. So rook 81, queen f5, queen d3, Queen d3 is a mistake, but I think the position was already quite practically difficult for white to play, where already white has to do something very defensively. A move like h4 looks weird, but it might be the best bet just to stop the coming g5, g4. And again, with queen d3, black finds a very, very nice move here in a move pawn to g5. You might be thinking that the traitor queen is going to be very nice for white because of the doubled pawns, but actually with f4 coming, this bishop is a big problem, and trying to move the rook out of the way to deal with it kind of leads to even bigger problems, where after bishop c1, g4, you're hitting the knight that is now the only thing defending d4, and once that fulcrum's kicked out of the way, you can see everything just falls apart for white, right? So white goes knight e1, takes, and yeah, I mean, black really should have won this game, you could say, if he played correctly. Like, g4 is a nice move to, fix the white king side in place, open up the h-file for an attack on the white king, potentially. Black goes knight c7, though, which gives white a chance to play g4 and try to lock things down, which actually might not be a very good idea, because you are giving a very nice f4 outpost for the black knight. Black decided to play the move bishop h8, which looks a little bit odd, but I think, yeah, just trying to maybe clear the way for the pawns to move forward and keep the bishop on his diagonal. But maybe not the most precise, because after gh5, well, you kind of wish that your rook had the h8 square available to get back the pawn and go after the weakness of h3 once you get the rook on h5. Black goes f5, and yeah, for around this point, you could say that the play was not perfect. I mean, it's a classical game, but of course, grandmasters do make mistakes as well, as we've seen here. Probably this is the last chance where black would really sort of push for a win after f4. And rook h8, if you get this h5 pawn and you get to attack h3, you're just absolutely loving life here. And if white goes h4, trying to get some exchanges, I mean, you can take, and once the pieces get swapped off, still feel like black is going to be better here. I mean, you are threatening rook takes h5, and if white does play bishop takes f4, this actually is a blunder because of rook g8, and you just get the rook out of the way, and then you'll just be able to take the bishop and win the game. Instead, black goes g4, which is a bit of a mistake, and eventually the game did end peacefully from here. I'll show you the final moves quickly without too much analysis. Fg4, h4 is probably a little bit impulsive, by the way, but it's what happened in the game. Knight e4, knight f5, probably both players were very short on time. Rook h8, though, is a very good move by black to go after this pawn and get your pawn back. So take, bishop g5. White's in a difficult position, so he decides he wants to swap off some pieces, which I think is a good philosophy. d5 also in the same spirit, white's wanting to open up the position. If white takes, then you're not in time to grab the pawn because of rook to d8 checkmate as such. I guess, okay, you can play c6 first, but that also opens up your king just a little bit. So black goes e5, which is a very good move, and d6 also a very valid attempt for counterplay. And since white hasn't played the previous moves in the very best way, it does mean that I think if you do play rook h5, you are probably going to be close to winning here. I'm guessing that black might have been a bit nervous that with the king blockading it, you don't need to get a rook in, and white would then be winning, but the fact you can block with your own rook definitely makes your life a lot easier. Actually, you could even play a move like knight d4 as well, and just cut off the defense of the pawn. Pick up a pawn and be a pawn up, have threats against the white king, and it should be winning with best play here. Instead, black misses his chance with king d7, and after rook b3, white is basically doing okay now, where white is getting enough counterplay to go after the black pawns. If king takes d6, white will probably go knight f4 and yeah, try to be annoying with this knight. Like if knight d4, knight e2 is one way to get a lot of pawns off the board very fast. In the game after rook e6, now it's actually white who's probably much better. Apparently rook a3 and just trying to attack this weak pawn like a5, b4 ideas, or even better a5, rook b3. It's just going to be really strong. There's not a good way for black to really defend the pawn and take these guys as well. But white missed his chance with rook b4, and yeah, the game after some more adventures eventually does peter out. This point, I'm a little bit surprised that white didn't play rook g5, just defending this pawn and attacking this guy. That would actually have been winning for white, but instead we had f4, e4, knight e5, and again, white should be winning in this position, but somehow after rook g8, knight e8, king f2, it says the draw was agreed, which is a bit odd since white was much better, but admittedly we are a little bit outside the scope of this topic of how to draw over GM. Because, yeah, I mean, black played very well in the early phase of the game. You can see that he just got a really dream position with a clear plan of attacking d4 and a clear plan to attack the white king. And by putting this pressure on white, it basically provoked mistakes, even from a strong Grandmaster opponent. And if black had made the most of his chances, like around, let's say, this point, then definitely black would win this sort of position with best play, like with g4 fixing the pawns and then gradually putting pressure on the d4 pawn. In the end, black misplayed it, but still was able to get a draw in the end. And also, those wondering about the puzzle, the reason d5 is a blunder here is because knight d4 just wins. It's all known as a Siberian trap, where they can't take the knight because queen h2 is mate, but you also can't really move the queen away because there's still knight f3 and queen h2 mate. So basically you either win the queen or you checkmate the white king in this position. So yeah, that was this game of how to draw with a Grandmaster. I'm sure you guys enjoyed it, given you got all the way to the end. In that case, definitely make sure to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, take care.